The current war on terror is a product of Saudi Arabia. Nearly 100 years ago, the Saudis indoctrinated the Bedouin tribes into an extremist ideology, and the Bedou were used to take over the Arabian Peninsula for the king. A rogue Ikhwan war party of 4,000 camels and warriors in the 1920s tried to take over Amman, Jordan, and Baghdad, Iraq, but were stopped, caught in the open, and machine gunned by the British using armored cars and airplanes. They were later machine gunned again by the king of Saudi Arabia, and they were scattered. Those Ikhwan, the extremist Bedou, that agreed to support and follow the king were his base. Those that sought to overreach and endanger the king by trying to take over the world were his enemies. The extremists trying to take over the world were never more than a minority, but they were always present. For generations, the Saudis have funded a fundamentalist takeover of Islam using oil wealth. Part of this is protectionist money paid to the extremists, and part of it is their own program of destabilization and conquest. They have succeeded fantastically. The view on the Arab Street and in Pakistan and other Islamic nations, these views are often extremist views, supporting death for leaving the faith and other similar views. Saudi Arabia has been allied with the United States since World War II. They send us oil and we protect them. The kings have always walked a tightrope, buying off the right-wing religious fanatics who support them and killing the ones who try to take over the world and take over from the king. From the beginning of Islam, there has been a minority of extremists who have advocated taking over the region and taking over the world. In the beginning, the Kharijites killed anyone who disagreed with them or got in their way, including Ali, the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad. The Wahhabi movement of the 1740s is in their image and was used by the king to conquer Arabia, the entire peninsula, for the Saudi king. They cannot be seen as separate, but they do at times clash. The 2003 war in Afghanistan was only possible if the U.S. Army was supplied by trucks going through Pakistan. The Taliban allowed the trucks to pass because they were paid $800 or more per vehicle. In effect, the U.S. taxpayer was funding both sides of this war. The same can be said of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, because every time we fill our gas tank at the pump, money is going to the Gulf and then on to fund terrorism. The United States is funding both sides of the never-ending war on terror. Today, the United States is energy self-sufficient, but our allies are not. The long game dictates the following: a tax on all imported oil, moving domestic energy usage to nuclear and solar, and changing over transportation to electric vehicles. Most importantly, using government subsidies to maximize the production and export of oil and gas so that the United States is the world's largest exporter, and international prices are permanently depressed to $40 a barrel or less. Like Russia, Saudi Arabia will go broke. Not soon, but 5 years is soon enough. They will go broke and either conform to a moderate, modern, secular state political model similar to that of Turkey under Ataturk, or they will be overthrown. It is preferable that they reform and remain stable, but It is probably going to be the latter. The most important thing to remember in the war on terror is not to adopt the narrative of the enemy, a war of civilizations. This war with the extremist minority is that of an ideology. It is an ideological war. It is not a war of race. It is not a war of religion. It is a war against an enemy ideology. Carpet bombing and nukes, however satisfying, are critical mistakes. Do not overreact and alienate the majority in your rush to defeat the minority. In Iraq, Al-Qaeda used car bombs against Shiite civilians to start a religious war between Sunni and Shia. This failed until the destruction of the shrine at Samarra began an all-out civil war. The Sunni population was forced to join Al-Qaeda for protection against the Shia death squads, and the plan of Al-Qaeda was complete. Do not make this mistake. Understand the enemy strategy. The enemy strategy is to use unlimited human population and limitless violence combined with unlimited time in order to win. They will trick the West into invading the region like the USSR invaded Afghanistan. Then they will tie down the Western Army in a tar baby strategy until they are exhausted and go broke and collapse, similar to what happened to the USSR. Understand the enemy strategy and use your strategy to attack and defeat the enemy strategy. So, most important of all, do not adopt the enemy narrative or overreact. That is number one. Second, cut off the money completely, suddenly, and forever in the manner described previously. This is the long game, so I suggest you begin preparing now. It will take 10 to 15 years to implement a new energy policy. Once in place, feel free to attack all forms of enemy finance with absolute impunity. Third, this is a battle for the mind. Engage the minds of the target population in a way that transforms them into sympathetic and reliable partners. Remove the enemy messages from the internet, from the airwaves. Remove the enemy messages from the mosques. Flood their society with your own message using newspapers, radio, television. Change the way their society feels about religion and its place within society. Feed moderation and starve the fanatics. Win the battle of the mind. Fourth, destroy the messengers of war who poison the minds of children and recruit the vulnerable. If you wait until the enemy comes onto the battlefield, you will lose. Drain the swamp using any means necessary in a finite period of time, 20 years or less. Hercules cut off the head of the Hydra, and 2 new heads took its place. Only when his nephew, Iolaus, used fire to cauterize the necks of the severed heads, as Hercules chopped them off, was Hercules able to destroy the Hydra. This means close all the madrasas and replace them with real schools, eliminate the people who preach this enemy ideology, only then will killing fighters on the battlefield matter at all. Fifth, and finally, realize that as long as the Saudis and Iranians battle for regional and world domination, this war without end will continue on and on. The wars between Catholic and Protestant lasted over 200 years. This is such a war. It is not in our long-term interest for this war to take place, but we cannot stop it. Only the two main protagonists can stop this war. And since it has been going on for 1,400 years, you should probably begin to practice a little patience. While they choose to war, let them. Aid both sides, but aid the weaker side more. Do not choose sides. Do not kill civilians. Do not get directly involved with your army. Use proxy forces. Do not make the last mistake the Romans made. When both sides seem exhausted, bring them together and attempt peace, but do not count on peace. Under no circumstances do anything to unite them against you. Divide and conquer. Feed the moderates and starve the extremists, but do not fall in love with the moderates, because they will not win a war. Perhaps most important of all is to realize what it is you are facing. Germany and Japan were teaching and indoctrinating second and third grade children into a war mentality prior to World War II. They were using school textbooks to indoctrinate their youngest children into a war mindset. These were going to be wars of annihilation, wars to destroy entire nations, entire races, entire religions, wars without pity, wars without end, until one side was destroyed utterly and completely. In case you missed it, we destroyed them. The Saudi-funded schools are poisoning the minds of children in just such a manner. You must acknowledge that this is a war of annihilation, and you must decide if you are going to be the victor and live, or if you are going to lose and be destroyed. When you acknowledge that you are in such a terrible situation, whether you like it or not, then you must, as a responsible and free adult, decide that you are going to win. There are no rules. Just because you have no interest in the crocodile does not mean the crocodile has no interest in you. There are no rules. Do not be constrained by legality. Do not be constrained by humanity or political correctness. To paraphrase Lincoln and our founding fathers, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Win in the next 20 years or lose in the next 30 or 40 years.